Hello, and welcome to another weekly live broadcast. Like last week, I think it's really nice that we just drink some tea together. We can't be together in person at this time, most of us, so we can utilize this technology and just sit and be together and share some tea together in quiet for a little while. I hope you have some tea and good space to drink it in with me. That's nice. I could do that for the whole time. We could just sit and drink tea and don't need to have any discussion. So we have, a lot of us, this time at home, and in the last broadcast we have spoken about that not only, our challenging times and adversity, a time where our practice will be tested, where we'll see the mettle of our practice, but that also such times are a call to practice. They are the conch shell in Buddhism that calls the monks during the retreat season. They would go off in the forest and sit under trees and meditate, and when it was time for discourse in the evening, they would blow a conch. So it's the voice of the Buddha. So that when adversity comes, it's also a time to practice more. But there's a whole other dimension to this retreat, other than just that it's a level or a gauge of our practice heretofore. How much we've practiced up until now will determine how we relate to this adversity, and also a call to practice, to do more practice. Along with that, there's another dimension to retreat, though, which is retreat offers us perspective. So it allows us to take a step back, and it allows us to let go and cut some strings and pull the plugs on some things, and to remember, what is important. And that stepping back is very, very powerful, especially if it allows you to cut some strings from, letting go of things doesn't mean necessarily giving them away, because it's nothing to do with the outside of like the legal social possession, but the internal attachment that we have to habits, to things, to ways of living as individuals and as a society. There's an opportunity to get up some perspective, right? You see how fragile the mind-made systems of government and civilization are. You see also, if you step back and you are practicing, you see how your own habits work. And you get a little bit of space and distance from your day-to-day mind, which is driven by lots of wondering and worrying and craving. And all that wondering and worrying and craving ultimately empowers the egoic solutions. So what the ego thinks should be, the egoic solutions are empowered by the wondering and worrying and craving. And the more we empower those, the more they hypnotize us, the solutions that the ego wants to our life situations. And the more that we do that, the less we have perspective. For example, we often fail to take the step back that's required to recognize or even ask what the ego's motivations are for offering those solutions that it desires. And when you do that and you take that step back, you often find that its solutions are childish and immature, and that the solutions that it's offering are actually not even really good for us. And you also begin to realize, as you step back and let go, that all that worry and craving and fretting to make things follow a certain track, to force things down an egoic track, that itself was actually blocking the balance and one's relationship with the Tao, which means blocking the light's ability to actually remove obstacles and resolve situations. So we, in essence, are standing on our own shoelaces. We're in our own way. And when we have a time and a space to step back, those voices can quiet down, and we can recognize all these strings and these attachments and pulls and habits and drives, and we can start to let go of some of these things. You can realize, there's a point after which worry, for example, is like it's easy to let it go. like for dying people, right? There's the stage when you're first maybe diagnosed with an illness, and there's lots of worry. But then eventually there's a surrender into this new existence that is one that will deal with health problems chronically until the end. And so there's a point at which you can like if you're facing now economic instability, you can really let go of those strings. And in doing so, you might find that, again, because all of the worry and fretting is empowering the egoic solutions, and the egoic solutions then hypnotize you, and you don't see any other solution. So you're in the way, you're blocking the Tao's ability to come through and creatively resolve the issue, so that sometimes when you surrender that worry and you just let go, the obstacles actually can resolve themselves. And the resolution not necessarily is going to be some magical thing in the sense that you let go and now you do nothing and automatically your problems are worked out. No, but what happens often is that when you let go of the worrying and fretting and you let go of your investment in a particular solution, which results in delusion, because the more attached and hypnotized by that solution you are, the less you see alternatives, the less you see other possibilities. And so what often happens is when we let go of the fretting and worrying and the investment, the emotional investment in a particular solution, the right solution then appears. So sometimes, certainly, when we step back and let go, it's like nature just resolves the issue for us. That does happen. But it might require your response. It might require your work, your effort. So if you're facing some economic adversity, there might be some things you need to do for that to resolve itself, certainly. But as long as you're really heavily invested in an egoic solution, you're most likely missing other solutions, including probably the most skillful one. And so when you let go and you get out of the way and clarity comes and you stop worrying and fretting and stop investing emotionally in a particular solution, you see, this is what I can actually do. And the response then becomes clear and effective. And so the situation again resolves itself because you stepped out of the way and let the light shine on it. And so our investment in particular outcomes blinds us. And it also blinds us, as I said, to the internal motivations that are causing us to invest in that solution, right? They are often childish. The child inside seeking some comfort, using coping mechanisms. Its solutions are usually coming from that kind of place. So the egoic solutions are usually selfish and immature, and ultimately, really, in the end, not good for us. Not really what we want, right? The ego says we want this, but that's why the old saying, right? Be careful, you might actually get what you want, because what you're really seeking is something deeper beyond that egoic goal. So you want, financial security, but why do you want that? So that what? You can spend more time with your family? Well, you could do that right now. Now things are unplugged. You can spend lots of time with your family. You see, you have to see what you really want. My first discourse with my teacher, he said, Zen is doing whatever you want. And I didn't like that at first. I thought that I thought he was completely wrong, actually. I was opposed to the whole lecture. Because as a teenager, I had tried kind of doing whatever I want, being wild, and it had not worked out so well. It was a highly unsuccessful mode of living for me. But over the years, I came to understand that what you keep an open mind when someone you respect gives a teaching and you don't agree with it. That's fine. As the Buddha said, the two characteristics of truth are that it is in concordance with the teachings of the wise and it's in concordance with your own experience. So that's very important. You don't take anything at face value or anything that any teacher says, myself, the Buddha, anybody, even the Buddha himself said this in the Kalama Suttas so famously. So, some of the teaching of the wise had said Zen is doing whatever you want, but it was not in concordance with my own experience. So it's not my wisdom. But, you keep an open mind to it because it is in concordance with the wise. Maybe later on you will understand, which in this case I did, because I kept an open mind, a beginner's mind. I said, okay, that's not for me, but returned to it occasionally and contemplated and thought about it. And over the years, slowly, I came to understand that there's deep truth in what he said, and that Zen is doing only what you want. But what he didn't say is that begs an even deeper question, which is, what do I really want? In order to do wholly what you want, you must first understand very clearly what you want. You must understand all the motivations inside of you, the infantile, inferior motivations, the childish motivations, and the higher motivations that actually lead to your prosperity and joy and fulfillment in this life. You have to understand those two inferior and superior voices that we all have inside of us, and you have to really understand what you want before you can architect it, obviously. But once you do find that thing, then Zen is doing certainly only that. And you will, if you have enough retreat and you can still those voices, you can then analyze their motivations, and you can see that you were blinded by your strong investment in very particular solutions to things. And so, and that causes other issues as well. The more invested we are in our solutions, the more we forget others as well, which is very important, right? Even if your motivations are good and what you're seeking is good and really great, if you are so focused on them and invested in them, you will lose your way, right? So if a medical student walks by a wounded person on the street in order to get to medical class, that's absurd. Some of my favorite Buddhist stories are like this. There's three in the Tipitaka, but basically they all boil down to the same thing. Somebody in ancient India, they hear about the Buddha, or they feel the Buddha. In some stories there's a more kind of foo-foo supernatural element. They have some strong feeling a Buddha has arisen in the world, or somebody tells them, and they are moved by this, and they have a desire to go study. So they leave their home, they renounce their worldly life, and they travel, of course in those days by foot, for a long time. And somewhere along the journey, they meet with someone who's in trouble, in need. They meet with a person who is sick or is facing some trouble, needs some protection, who's, could be even their wagon has fallen into the ditch. It doesn't matter. They meet with somebody who needs their aid, and they don't stop. They say, no, I can't. I have to get to the Buddha. I can't help this person because I have to get to the Buddha. And in those stories, every time when they arrive at the Jetvana or wherever the Buddha was, and there he is on his seat, and that person can't see them. So the story is, right, if you pass by the opportunity to help someone in order to get to the Buddha, there's no Buddha there when you get there. The medical student who passes by a sick person to get to medical class doesn't really understand what it means to be a doctor. You can't pass by an opportunity to serve in order to create another opportunity to serve. That doesn't work at all. And this is what also happens when we become very heavily invested in our own egoic channels and pathways, is that we fail to see the others around us. We get blinded to the empathy and compassion of other people, and we get blinded to their ways in which that we could help people. And then when we get wherever we were trying to get, it will be empty, and we will be, this is, if you push this to its extreme, you have classic stories of people who are extremely driven to have worldly success, and then they work really hard and ignore everything but their own ambition. And then when they do succeed, they don't have any friends anymore. They don't have any companions. They don't have anyone to share that success with, because all the people that were associated with them have left, because in their ambition they have burned those bridges. And so now that they have that success, it's hollow or isn't enjoyable or nice. So in all of these ways, a retreat can give us perspective. It can allow us to step back and cut lots of strings and learn to surrender the egoic solutions. And what that really also is doing is opening the door to a trust in nature, a trust in God, Buddha, nature, whatever, the Tao, whatever you want to call that which is sacred and divine. Or if you're skeptical and you don't want to work with that concept or energy, doesn't matter. The nature itself, learning to trust in nature's ability to work things out, right? Because it's the human attachment to particular solutions that also destroys nature, right? We don't let nature have her time, let her have her space to work things out in the way that she wants to. We pressure and push her to take the shape we want. We cut the forest, we build the plantation, we make the rows of tea trees, we fertilize them with our chemicals, we force it into a particular shape that it doesn't want to be in. The moment you let go, the moment humans step back, it leaves that shape and goes back to the shape that it wanted. Right? And we don't give it its time and its space. A lot of the agrochemicals in agriculture are because we aren't giving nature time. If you let, when insects come, for example, they attract things that eat insects. And so over time, over years, over seasons, nature will balance itself. A lot of insects come, maybe one tree dies, doesn't matter, that will make space for other plant life to grow where that tree died. You turn over a dead tree, it's not dead, it's full of bugs and insects and new plant life, etc. And the things that eat insects will come, right? It's why, like Master Tsai often says, one of the ways that you can tell a good, healthy, organic tea farm is when you find spiders, because it actually takes like 3 to 5 years of organic farming to attract spiders, because spiders are coming because there's bugs. So eventually things will come that eat those insects and the population everything will balance, right? But the human comes and doesn't want to give nature its time and space. We say, no, I need 50 kilos and I need them now. I need them this year. So I can't afford insects of any kind. So in stepping back and letting go, we on a personal level are learning to trust nature again. Trust the divine, trust the sacred, trust the Tao. Let things work out. That doesn't mean becoming a pincushion. As I said, sometimes when you let go and trust in the Tao, things have a magic way of working out on their own. But often what happens is that where and how you should be participating towards an effective response and solution becomes clear. And you realize that you were blinded to the proper response and solution because you were so attached to your own egoic solution and they had that myopia, that tunnel vision. And in retreat, in stepping back, we can often come to see those things. I hope these contemplations help you a little bit and give you some food for you to think about this week as you have time off of work and time to practice and meditate. You can contemplate these things. Ask yourself, what's important to me? Where am I overly invested in egoic solutions? How can I step back and let nature's light shine through so that I can see more clearly all the alternatives, right? Because the ego always likes black and white situations. It has to be this, or everything will fall into the pit and be terrible, right? But there's never just two roads. It's infinite roads. And so we can step back and use this time vitally and cut the strings mostly to those inferior voices we all have inside. So they aren't so noisy. So we have a little time, some questions maybe?
So a question from yesterday on the app, people would like to know your perspectives on consumption of media during this time.
So someone's asking about the consumption of media, specifically during this time, but I think the answer, my views on the consumption of media are the same during coronavirus pandemic or in general, which is that there's no formula. In this day and age, most of us, we want healthy bodies, so we we are conscious of what we eat. And I think that's an essential part of being human. You have to be conscious of your diet in terms of health. At a minimum, we can also be conscious of our diet in terms of its environmental impact, and impact on other humans, et cetera, et cetera. But at least in terms of your own health, right? To be a healthy human, you have to be careful about what you eat. But there's no answer to that because it's so specific to each individual what one should or should not be eating, what one can or cannot eat, because not all eating also is just strictly physical nourishment. Food is not just stuff. Food is emotion. Food is love. Food is all kinds of energetic things. There's a very big difference between the food a mother makes, the spaghetti that a mother makes, and the spaghetti that Joe the cook makes at a diner when he's having a bad day because his girlfriend left him or something. Right? Those are very different spaghettis. So we all have had that experience of having food cooked by someone that loves us, there is something there that feeds us. And we all have the experience of eating comfort food that may not be good for us, but it nourishes the senses and makes us feel good. So not all eating is just pure, like, you can't treat all eating just like, a certain amount of carbohydrates together with no glycerides and blah, blah, blah. Like this is not just a chemistry. It's not just a bag of atoms and we just put the right recipe of aminos and things and we'll be healthy. There's emotional elements, there's spiritual elements, there are physical elements, chemical elements, and biochemistry, and then there's billions of living organisms in me. And a lot of them I need to survive. There's a huge biome in my gut that it's the health of that particular biome is important to my health. So where am I going? How does this relate to media? It's important, actually. The analogy is perfect. They're one and the same. And so the solution is that, some people need more or less of all those different elements in diet, right? A good example would be like when you're 18 years old, you could eat pizza like 4 times a week and you can metabolize it. Maybe you shouldn't be eating pizza 4 times a week, but it's not going to severely impact your health, especially if your other meals, aside from those 4 meals a week, are healthy. So let's say we have a active, pretty healthy 19, 20-year-old person, and they're eating pretty consistently healthy food, and then they go out for pizza 4 or 5 times a week. No problem. They can metabolize that, right? For me, I can have pizza once a year. It's like that much. And it has to be prepared right, like that. It's just it's just me. It doesn't apply to any. The age is maybe not the only important factor, but in my case, that much gluten and dairy, especially, and that recipe. If it's not, it has to be well-made pizza, and even then, once, twice a year, I'm good. I love pizza. Satisfies some emotional feeling, and that's how much I can digest. So how does that relate to media? Well, we're conscious about food in those ways, but we also, especially if you have a meditative practice, you have to be careful of what you consume psychically, because it works the same way, in the sense that there's no answer, because the answer, just as the answer for diet is different for every person, and it is complicated. It involves physical, mental, emotional elements. The media that we consume is the same. So one person might be able to consume lots of media or lots of a particular type of media, and it won't impact their psychic structure. They won't be overly influenced by it. And then another person will be really knocked off by it, right? So, personally, I'm not impacted by violence in a TV show or a movie. It doesn't ruffle my feathers. I'm not, if it's extreme, I'm not so into horror movies. If it goes to that level, it will impact my, because now we're talking about even worse than pizza. We're talking about maybe candy or something. I don't know. But if it goes to that level, maybe. But like a war movie, or if there's a plot, but it happens to have some violence in it, it's not all that. It doesn't ruffle my psychic structure. It doesn't impact my meditation the next day, over the next week. But for someone else, they just see one scene like that, and boom, they're impacted by it very deeply. So your sensitivity to all of that is very different for each person. And so there's no answer other than you need to be conscious of what you're consuming and how often and how much, right? If you care too much about what other people think about you, most likely you're consuming lots of social media. If you're watching lots of horror movies, then most likely you're having nightmares and dealing with fear. If you're, et cetera, et cetera. Like these things are certainly impactful on us. So we have to be mindful and conscious, but there's no answer. You have to know yourself, and you have to know what you can and cannot consume. And maybe take breaks. Take also media fasts is helpful as well, even if it's for a day or a week or whatever. But occasionally, having those fasts will, again, as I spoke about earlier, give you some perspective and help you to understand yourself and what you can and cannot consume and in what amount.
So there's a question from Instagram. Now clearly seems to be the time for amplified self-cultivation, but it also seems that serving our fellow humans goes a long way right now. How, through tea, can we serve each other without physically serving a guest at our tea tables in this unique moment that we are currently in?
There's kind of like three questions in there, it seems it's like a time for cultivation, it seems like but also a time for service, and how do we use tea to serve, especially when we can't go out and serve tea? There's a lot of questions in there. There's an old Chinese saying, when the man of Tao can be of service, he's of service. When he cannot, he retreats and cultivates himself. Cultivating yourself is of service to humanity, right? It is not selfish for a doctor to take 8 years and go study medicine in a very concentrated way, because that will empower them to do far more for the world than they could otherwise in terms of healing. It's not selfish, for example, for right now, this applies to me. Right now, I'm working on my next book. So to take these months and go into retreat so that I can produce a book that hopefully will help some other beings is not selfish, right? If the poet goes off to the woods for 3 weeks and comes up with a poem that hundreds of years later is still, like William Blake or something, still transforming human consciousness, then it is not selfish. And that withdrawal is what is required to get as I was just speaking about, that withdrawal is what is required to get the clarity of vision and wisdom that is needed for empowered creations to happen in service of humanity. So, doing nothing is not laziness. It is a pregnant nothingness in Zen anyway. It's full of the vibrancy in life and creative power, and all powerful creations that are capable of transforming oneself and others come out of that nothingness. They come out of the emptiness into form. They come out of the space between things, between the self and its thoughts and its solutions and egos and worries. They come from deeper places if they're going to be from beyond, really. If you experience creative power, whether it be through photography or painting or writing or poetry or whatever, you know that it comes like a flash. It comes from somewhere beyond you, and you have to have space for that to happen. And so, stepping back is not, it's not unhelpful. And second of all, when you cultivate yourself, you are also saving the world from your stuff, right? So the first of the 4 Bodhisattva vows, the 4 main ones, there's others, but there's 4 big ones. The first is, all beings without number, I vow to liberate. And that's really intense, like all the beings in the world, every single cell organism, everything, I'm going to liberate all beings is just so intense. It's an ocean of suffering. What can I do? And but the first thing that you can do always is liberate all beings from your stuff. So the less of your stuff there is in this world, the less stuff there is in this world. Stuff meaning kleshas, defects of character, inferior voices, those childish inferior voices. So the more you rid the world of that, the more you rid the world of that. And so self-cultivation is a form of service. If it's it's one thing to just go retreat to an island and build a big house with a swimming pool and sit around and consume. It's another to retreat to the mountains and cultivate oneself. So both people are kind of surrendering society and letting the world be what it is. But in one case, this is going to result in things that will advance humanity. Because eventually that sage, whatever insight he has, or poem he writes, or sutra, or insight, or whatever it is, he or she will realize that to fulfill that insight, she has to give it to the world. And eventually, when the opportunity arises, somebody from the world will go find her, or she'll come down and give that teaching to the world itself. So there's always a balance between self-cultivation and service. And that's a difficult balance to find. I'm no master of that myself. Like most people, I've spent most of the last 8 years extremely off balance in terms of serving and giving until I had nothing left for myself, sacrificing my own practices, my own well-being, my own health. And then the obvious retardation of that is that I become less and less able to effectively serve. So, and then when I take the time, I also feel guilty. I haven't yet mastered this. I'm working on it. This period of between centers is perfect for me. I have a beautiful space. I'm in a state of retreat. I'm working on my book. I'm working on meditating and cultivating myself, and working on finding the balance in that. So I don't have the solution. I'm not a master of that, but we all deal with that dynamic, and I'm more aware of the problem than I ever have been in my life, and I'm taking steps to find the right and healthy balance between those two things. In terms of tea, I don't. If you're looking for something practical, maybe you could, if the post is still open, you could send a little tea to somebody that needs it, or have like this a session online where you drink tea together in quiet.
Claudia is asking, how do you know whether a solution is ego-driven or is the right choice for your situation?
That's a good question. How to know, whether the voice that you're hearing is an egoic impulse or it is a healthy solution that you should actually invest in. That's a beautiful question. It's a difficult question to answer, but really, ultimately, if you want water to be clear, if you have turbid, muddy water and you want it to be clear, you just leave it still. And when it stills, it is the nature of water, like it is our nature, the nature of our mind. When still, the water begins to separate from that which it's not. So all of the particles in it start to go to the bottom and the water starts to clarify. And the same with our mind. When it's still, clarity comes. So if you're having trouble because there's too many voices and they're too noisy and navigation is an issue and you don't know which voice is what, you need to settle down and quiet, right? Because this is a listening issue, and we all have this, right? So there's only really two issues, yin or yang. There's only really two aspects to all solutions. We either don't know which solution, which means we're not listening, or we know the solution and we're not investing energy in it, which is basically fear. So if you know the solution and you're not taking steps, then the answer is courage, muster, energy, and courage is not the absence of fear, it's the answer to fear. And if you don't know, if it's an issue of that, then the answer is listen, stop, be still, and quiet down and listen, and the answer will become very clear. In part because, as I said, when you step back and quiet down and things become clear, one of the things that becomes clear is the motivations, right? The motivations. And you see more clearly what the motivations are for that particular solution. And the motivations that are suggested by our ego or the inferior child voices inside of us, they're always motivations of fear. They're coping mechanisms. They're seeking comfort. They're seeking usually what's not really good for us. And so when seeing those motivations helps very clearly. And it is like when things clarify, and what also all kinds of aspects clarify, right? Your reason clarifies, your intuition clarifies, your motivations clarify. All of those things together help shine a light on the proper course of action.
Daniel asks how to handle fear.
How to handle fear is the question. How do you handle fear? You handle fear with courage. You have courage in you. It's given to you by your ancestors. It's given to you by the earth. We have grown up in soft times relatively. Our ancestors faced wars and dangers and diseases. They didn't even know what diseases were. They thought they were just curses or aspects of nature that came, or they had superstitious views of them. And they were around death, and they were around suffering and pain a lot more, and just understood that there's no courage is within all of us. It's in every cell. Little beings have it. Even a snail goes to cross the road, and there's danger, and there's danger in all of nature, and all beings have the capacity to face it. So you have to muster courage in the face of fear. You don't overcome fear and become fearless. You learn to stare it down. So if I tell you I went to the beach today, you wouldn't have any inclination to say, "Oh, how brave." But if I told you that some trauma caused me to be deathly afraid of the ocean, and I have steered clear of it for 20 years, but yet today I went to the beach and even walked in the ocean, then you would say, "How brave." That's not true, by the way. I'm just making an example. So the point is that bravery is not the absence of fear. It's the response to fear. And bravery. So this is like, what do we do with fear? We muster courage, and then you could just ask another question. Well, where do you get the courage from? It's in you. You have a far greater potential and capacity than you yourself could possibly imagine. Your limits have come nowhere near being tested. You could be, by orders of magnitude, stronger than you are. So I think our time is up. We have some good fertilizer for our tea trees for this week, things to grow and think about and contemplate. Again, for the sake of just like this month, we maybe after this month continue these broadcasts, and then I'm happy to, in these weekly broadcasts, talk with you guys about all kinds of tea geekery, and we can talk about kettles and pots and what kind of tea and how many grams and all those things. I'm happy to talk about those things. I love talking about tea, but it seems just, as I said last week, it seems a little bit trite, or there's a lot of people suffering in the world, and so it seems a little bit foolish to talk about things that are a little bit more surface or banal in a time of great change and upheaval and collective adversity, when so many humans are suffering, and really we would rather sit in silence or even pray for them, as opposed to just talking about that. So we're trying to keep these broadcasts a little more focused on the Tao part of Cha Tao. But in the future we can return to talking about either or both or more tea and less Tao, if that's what tickles you. In the meantime, I hope that this week you are all safe and happy and healthy. And if you are suffering, I pray for you that you meet these challenges and adversity, and they help you grow, and that you can deal with them and come out of your health problems or financial problems or whatever other adversity you're facing, that the solutions are available for you. Ultimately, they are always. Even if the only solution is that I can do nothing on the outside, and all that's left is just my orientation, and that I can just rest in acceptance and be still, because there's nothing effective to do at this point. Even if that's the solution, that is still a solution. So there is always a solution. Even if your whole body's paralyzed, there's still one solution left, which is your orientation to that paralysis. So may the solutions be clear to you, and may you remember all the love and light that you're surrounded with already, in the eyes of the people that you're with and in the world as well. And may this be a catalyst for great change for all of us. Have a wonderful week. Drink lots of tea.